Well, it wasn't all blood and guts on Piers Morgan for Trump. I had to include this clip as a gift to you. Uh, Once again, Trump cannot get out of the shadow of the John McCain controversies. Here he is with Piers.
I knew Senator John McCain well. I liked him. I respected him. I quite enjoyed your battle with him when he was alive. You would give it to him, he'd give it to you, and it went on. It seems a little beneath you, if you don't mind me saying, that now he's dead, you're carrying on attacking him. Is it not time to let it go?
No, I don't attack him. People ask me, like you're asking me. I didn't bring his name up, you did.
Sure.
You brought his name up, John McCain. So I'm not attacking him at all. I don't think about him. I was not a fan.
Now, it's just so hilarious. It's like he can't get away from it. You know, he just wants to never have to think about this guy, look at him, or talk about him again. But it keeps following him around. Well, Joe Biden has something following him around as well, and it's the allegations of plagiarism. The campaign acknowledged that it lifted phrases without attribution from various nonprofit publications in its climate and education plan. So here's a report with me and Tim to discuss that and other items. Joining us once again on the Uprising, Joe Biden for President correspondent Tim Donner. Tim, I leave out your many, many, many other titles and honorifics because it's the most important one that I'm interested in, and that is the Joe Biden correspondent. This week, huge story on abortion, huge story on plagiarism. Set the table for us. Abortion first, please, if you would. What went on?
Well, first of all, being called the Biden for president correspondent implies that I'm actually an agent of the Biden campaign. I actually resemble that remark, Scott, but I'll try to overlook it.
You better take the fifth.
Yeah, I'm prepared to do that, counselor. The thing with Biden is that he had, let's talk about the Hyde Amendment, because the whole thing revolves around that. That was something that was passed in the 1970s, famously by Henry Hyde, influential congressman from Illinois. And what it did was prohibit the use of federal funds for abortion, so that while abortion was declared a constitutional right in Roe versus Wade in 1973, it also didn't mean that there was a right to federal funding for abortion.
Yeah,
so that
and I think I can just poke in here and say what's important about that, or even more outsized than maybe just any standard piece of legislation, is it's sort of one of these overarching things where if anything brushes up against it, that then becomes a big issue, that it would breach the Hyde Amendment. That just forbids the use of taxpayer funds for elective abortions.
And I think the thing that people need to consider, that is an organization like Planned Parenthood, which performs more abortions than any other organization in the country, by not using federal funds for abortion, they can use it for other purposes and then sort of displace their fundraising efforts elsewhere. So in effect, there is federal funding for abortion, but that's an argument for another day. Anyway, Joe Biden supported the Hyde Amendment for years, right up to now. There was a clip of him talking to someone at a fundraising event where he said that he wanted to get rid of it. But then his campaign affirmed that he was still in support of the Hyde Amendment. And now apparently he's pulled back from that and said he's not in favor of the Hyde Amendment. So the political courage level is not terribly high.
Oh, wait a second now. Let's not. Tim, I've read a story as recently as today which discussed that this was just an evolution of his thinking on the issue, and was not prompted by any sort of political calculation or machination. As a matter of fact, they would argue that if Joe Biden wasn't a candidate for president, he still would have reached that decision, that his long-standing, career-long support of the Hyde Amendment was just to end naturally in the spring and summer of 2019. What do you say to those charges?
Well, look, for a guy who said that Vice President Mike Pence was a decent guy, and then after some left-wing activist tweeted something, Biden then immediately apologized for calling Pence a decent guy. I would expect about the level of political courage that he showed on the Hyde Amendment. So now he's taken it off the table as an issue at the expense of showing that he will say anything and do anything to soothe the savage beast, which is the resistance in the
All right, well,
Democratic Party.
let me ask you this. So I think certainly it was a wholly political calculation. Of course, if there's as if there's any kind for that person to make, like there's some moral, like, whatever. Anyway, it's ridiculous. So, granting that it's a naked political calculation, one thing that sort of made me say, about this is I know that Biden covets these sort of white suburban Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin type voters, and a lot of those are Catholics. And those Catholics, while they may sort of not want a reversal of Roe v. Wade, this may be just a bit of a bridge too far, just like I think partial birth abortion was for a lot of those folks. So what do you think about that? Is there a potential political pitfall here for him?
Well, I mean, the question that Joe Biden is probably, or at least should be asking himself every single day when he wakes up is, how far left do I have to go in order to win the nomination without ruining my chances in a general election? And I think abortion is one of those things where I think he felt he would have been a punching bag throughout the, what is it going to be, 15 Democratic debates if he continued to hold to his position on the Hyde Amendment. So for the sake of political expedience, he says, let's just say I'm no longer in favor of it. And of course, a president doesn't have a whole lot to say about abortion, does he, Scott?
Well, I mean, realistically, of course not. No, he's got no. Well, unless they invent some extra legal way to do it, which is always possible, Tim. Let's not give them any ideas, right? I mean, that's the last thing we want to do.
God forbid.
All right, so you think he won't? All right, so there's two sort of very quick takeaways. Does he pay a significant political price for a flip-flop in the primary sort of challenge, or is that a win for him? And then in the general, what is this, a win or a loss for him? This on this change evolution on this issue?
I think that's an easy question. That's what they call a softball, Scott. I mean, it's an advantage for him in the Democratic primary because it takes it off the table as an issue, because he's now said, basically threw up his hands and said, okay, I'm against the Hyde Amendment. So it takes it off the table for him as an issue. But in the general election, I mean, he was against it before he was for it, before he was against it, right? It's the John Kerry thing, the flip-flop, the fact that, as you and I know, Scott, the man has absolutely no principles. He is a career politician who's interested in one thing and one thing only, which is seeking and maintaining power.
Well, let's not act like that's not a principle that motivates him, Tim. I think that's your great peril. Yeah, okay. to your great peril, you say
okay, I stand corrected. The higher principle.
It's actually outrageous that you would say that, really, given the facts.
But the abortion thing wasn't the big thing this week, Scott. I mean, that became secondary to the.
All right, let's report what the main Biden piece is as follows. Go ahead.
Well, the P word, plagiarism. I mean, and few people are aware of this, but this is a history lesson for people who weren't aware that Joe Biden had already run for president 31 years ago. In 1988, as a matter of fact, it was 1987 because he never even made it to 88.
The good old days.
He was discovered to have blatantly plagiarized a speech by Neil Kinnock, the British Labour Party leader at the time. And I mean, not only did he plagiarize it, but it was obvious because the speech that he plagiarized was in a prominent political commercial in England for Neil Kinnock. Now, if you don't think that Biden just ripped off this speech word for word, we've got the exact speeches by Biden and by Neil Kinnock, and you can judge for yourself whether this is a guy who, by the way, I'll just set it up by saying too, Scott, that he was accused of plagiarizing in law school as well at my alma mater, Syracuse University. So, but the Kinnock thing was the big one, and you can roll the side-by-side comparison of Biden and Neil Kinnock.
Why is it that Joe Biden is the first in his family ever to go to a university? Why is it that my wife, who's sitting out there in the audience, is the first in her family to ever go to college?
Why am I the first Kinnock to be able to get to university? Why is Gladys the first woman in her family? Was it because they were weak? Those people who could work 8 hours underground and then come up and play football? Weak?
My ancestors who worked in the coal mines in northeast Pennsylvania and come up after 12 hours and play football for 4 hours?
Does anybody really think that they didn't get what we had because they didn't have the talent or the strength or the endurance or the commitment? Of course not. It was because there was no platform upon which they could stand.
No, it's not because they weren't as smart. It's not because they didn't work as hard. It's because they didn't have a platform upon which to stand.
What a
Well,
yeah.
I mean, Scott,
As a man who makes his way in the world by the use of words, to say that speech couldn't have been edited with a few word changes, do you know what I mean? Like, it's laziness too, Tim. It's not like, oh well, if he changed the word platform into some other word. I mean, like,
well,
are you kidding me?
You brought up an interesting word, which is laziness, okay? And that's what happened this week in the latest instance of plagiarism, certainly not by Biden himself. He's not setting up the website. But I mean, they're rolling out their climate change policy to try to be somewhat responsive to the radical ideas of like all the other candidates in the Democratic race. And the best they can do is to cut and paste pieces from other, left-wing environmental activists, resistance organizations, and not provide.
It's a global climate crisis too.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say, Scott. It's too late on a Friday, and I've lost my mind, and I apologize to you and the listeners.
It's them that I'm worried about the most. Okay.
And
please.
I renounce everything that I've said previously on this particular podcast. Scott, let's put it this way. When Joe Biden entered this campaign, he knew there were two things he couldn't afford to do. One of them was to keep putting his hands on members of the opposite sex. And the other was to not plagiarize or have his campaign plagiarized. Now, look, we talked last week about how he put his hands on a 10-year-old and then made fun of the people that accused him of creeping them out by putting his hands on them. The several women, at least half a dozen, that came forward. So he revived that issue, but he's really revived the plagiarism issue. Now, look, he's not sitting there, doing this on his website. He didn't know probably doesn't know much about the computer. But the point is that it's lazy staff work. Like you said, laziness. It was lazy staff work. They just cut and pasted some ideas that they thought would soothe, the radical base and make them not go after him. And that's what you get.
Okay, what about this Todd Tapper Biden clip here?
Well, I mean,
is that Chuck Todd and Jake Tapper?
That's Chuck Todd and Jake Tapper. And this was such an amateur hour by the Biden campaign. It was such a JV move in a varsity field. You'll hear all of that stuff. That even his friends in the elite media, the Trump-hating media, people like Chuck Todd at NBC and Jake Tapper at CNN, who hate Trump with every fiber of their being and would like to see Biden or any other Democrat beat him, even they had to admit this was truly embarrassing. Roll it.
Joe Biden has his name on a public policy institute at the University of Pennsylvania. He's been preparing to run for president at least for the last 18 months, perhaps longer than that, in different ways. Why are they cutting and pasting climate change proposals at the last minute? Is this a sloppy campaign? Are they not up and running? What's going on?
This was obviously a junior varsity moment for this campaign in what should be very much the varsity level squad. It's embarrassing.
This is a pretty amateur mistake for the frontrunners campaign to make on a substantial policy rollout when they had to know, when Team Biden got together planning to announce his campaign, the one thing they cannot do is plagiarize.
Right. So they couldn't.
By the way, I appreciated the real genuine sense of urgency in Chuck Todd's voice as he went about it. This was a man who was not pleased with the news he was reporting.
No, I mean, he was acting like, hey, Joe, you got to straighten up your act. I mean,
how are we gonna get through this thing?
But I mean, it says a lot about Biden, doesn't it, Scott? That, I mean, here are the two things that he can't do. He can't put his hands on members of the opposite sex, and he can't plagiarize or allow his campaign to do it. You'd think that'd be the first things that would be brought up at the first campaign meeting. And here he's revived both of those issues. And I mean, it's truly embarrassing for this
Tim,
guy.
There's one thing I know, that when it comes to these important decisions, when he's in consultation with his doctor, Jill Biden, he's going to be able to pull out of it, and we're going to see more from him out there. Thank you so much for your report, Mr. Tim Donner, Joe Biden for President correspondent to The Uprising.
Thank you.